That was the late bell. Let's get started. I'm your host, John Phillips. Our guest today is Doris Santoro, a professor at Bowdoin College. But first, our do now is to make sure that you are subscribing to the Late Bell feed on Apple Music, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you listen. In addition, make sure that you're following the show on Twitter at Late Bell Pod and me at By John Phillips. Lastly, make sure that you're spreading the word. If you like this episode, you can share it out on Facebook, share it on Twitter, talk about it in the Teacher's Lounge. Wherever you're talking about the work that we do every day, make sure that you're including the podcast in the conversation. Our goal here, of course, is to make sure that we're having these conversations and treating education like the valued part of American life that it is. As always, to start the pod off, I give myself 3 minutes or less to give a brief overview of the topic of the day. And today that topic is demoralization. Let's not get it twisted. Teaching is hard work no matter the context. It calls for your undivided attention for 4 or 5 hours each day while supervising children who all bring their own hopes and hurdles and cheers and fears and everything else into your space. And it is your job to catalyze all of that energy and all of those variables into learning. Lots of teachers sleep close to 12 hours a night the week after school has ended because this work takes love and energy and motivation to do it right for the entire school year, no matter the situation. Yet one of the biggest buzzwords we hear around teacher retention is burnout. Teachers leave at alarmingly high rates in their first few years of teaching because the stress and the expectations are all too much and they get worn out and they leave. Sometimes their school, sometimes the field entirely. Those are the general stories that we hear around why we have teacher shortages in certain areas and why we lose those first year and first few year teachers at such an alarmingly high rate. Now consider any research on burnout, from articles in Harvard Business Review to the staggeringly high number of books by clinical and organizational psychologists. And it becomes clear that teachers can certainly become burnt out. They can take on too much, they can carry the weight of their students' worlds on their shoulders, and the like. But the paradigm of teachers and the teaching profession generally is different than that of a BCG consultant or a second-year med school student. While education is not the first choice for close to 40% of people who enter teaching, teachers do generally enter the profession because they want to help students. They love the material that they teach, and they believe that they can make a difference. Thus, it would be imperative to think that the same reasons that fatigue and cause people to leave other, more individualistically oriented professions would cause teachers to leave their schools or to find new careers. This is where the concept of demoralization comes into play. We'll learn a lot more about demoralization when we speak to Professor Santoro in a minute. But for now, imagine the list of what students want and need out of a school year, and the list of what teachers want and need, and the list of what administrators and districts want and need. Suffice it to say, in many situations, those lists don't overlap as much as necessary. And it puts teachers into a very difficult position. Talk to any teacher, and they will tell you a story about a time when they did something at school not because they thought it was a good idea, but because their administrator told them to. And there were no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Harken back now to why teachers enter into the profession in the first place. To help students, to teach content they love, and to make a difference. And consider the fissure that occurs in a teacher's vision of change when she realizes that this constant push or pull between serving the administration and serving the students is ever present. This is where demoralization begins, and so it's a perfect time for me to bring in Professor Doris Santoro from Bowdoin College, where she is an Associate Professor of Education and Chair of the Education Department. Doris, thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure.
So we all know the general statistics around teacher turnover in this country and the impact that teachers leaving the profession can have on kids and schools. And why I'm so excited to get a chance to talk to you is because the focus of your research has really been on why teachers leave the profession. And I guess we can jump off right from the title of your book. Through all the time you've spent in schools and talking to teachers, why have you found that teachers become so demoralized as time goes on?
The two biggest reasons that teachers become demoralized is because they feel like they're doing wrong by students, or they're not doing what they set out to do in becoming a teacher, right? So maybe you're making me someone who's paying more attention to uniforms and dress than actually teaching, or that's in the category of sort of not, this isn't why I went into teaching to be a cop, or that they are feeling like they're doing wrong by students, right? Where you're saying like, I am having to follow this scripted curriculum, but the scripted curriculum is not meeting the needs of the students where they are right now at all. So those are the two biggest reasons that I found that teachers were demoralized, not necessarily those specific examples, but those general categories: harm to students or denigrating the profession.
And sometimes those two can even overlap, because if you end up having to spend so much time policing hoodies and cell phones and go down the list, you can end up not actually being able to focus on the academic side of things, which can lead to feeling like you're not meeting the needs of the students anyway.
Absolutely. Another great example is all of the incredible amount of paperwork or data entry. And so, or engaging with software platforms that are completely ridiculous. And so teachers spend all of their time doing that, where they're saying, you know what, I really want to be planning lessons for my students. I really want to be calling home and finding out what's going on with this student. Instead, they're busy inputting something into, some sort of data management platform.
Did you find any difference between more seasoned teachers and newer teachers in any of those categories in terms of their level of frustration, or did the level of demoralization generally increase as you progress through your years of teaching?
Well, so the people I interviewed had from 5 years to 35 years of experience. And the reason I wanted to start with 5 years is because I wanted to show that demoralization is not just the same as disillusionment. I think a lot of people disregard demoralization as disillusionment. Oh, well, why didn't you didn't realize what you were getting into? I want to be really clear that I think people who have fewer than 5 years of experience can be demoralized. I just chose strategically to focus on people who were from 5 to 35 years. I do think that there were people who were in that category of having taught for more than 15 years who remembered a radically different time in education. And so they found the job that they were in unrecognizable to them.
Right.
And that was a huge source of demoralization. At the same time, those same people, two of the most senior people that I interviewed were people who had dramatic transformations and were able to be remoralized. So I would want to be very careful that we don't write teachers with the most significant experience off and say, all right, well, their time has passed, or they're, they came into teaching at a time that doesn't exist anymore. Too bad for them. I don't think we should do that at all. I also think that maybe some of the teachers who were on the less experienced side tended to have more significant conflicts with their school-based leadership. And I actually don't think I've ever said this before, but your question made me think of it. And I think part of that is because they saw that they often had more experience in actually educating than those who were in the position of supposedly being an educational leader in their school. And so they felt very little tolerance for the ways in which their school leaders were both unprofessional and deaf to the needs of teachers and students.
That's really interesting. And then one distinction that I think you also make is between demoralization and burnout, and seeing that there is a stark differentiation between those two concepts. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So, we hear so much about teacher burnout in the media. And what that suggests is that the person who is burnt out can't handle it anymore. They don't have any more resources to bring to their work. They just have been used up. I talk about it in terms of a candle, that you've burnt out a candle. There is no more wicker wax left.
Mm.
And the teachers who I've spoken with who are demoralized, they are incredibly active. They are trying to find ways to make changes. They are often some of the most significant leaders in their school. They are working many hours in many different roles. It is not that they don't have anything left to give. Their resources have not been extinguished. The problem is they feel that their resources are being directed in ways that render them complicit in wrongdoing.
Right. And that distinction is so important to really highlight, because I think you're right that we are so quick to use the term burnout. And, burnout is a term that we use in other areas of the media all the time. And you're right that in all of those cases, the idea is that people can't come back after being burnt out. Whereas you already talked about the idea of remoralization is key to what you were really looking at in terms of solutions. I think that concept, the idea that demoralization is something that can be bounced back from, is really, really key for not only teachers to understand so they can keep hope, but also for principals and for district administrators to really internalize so they understand that it's not just that teachers are a resource that you, like a candle, you light, and that eventually it burns out, and at that time they're no longer of any use to you.
Absolutely. Teachers are a renewable resource. And I'm glad too that you brought this up, because one of the distinctions between burnout and demoralization is that burnout is often understood as a problem of internal to the person. Oh, they weren't taking good enough care of themselves. They didn't conserve their time. They didn't, set up enough. They didn't set up good boundaries. But demoralization is not a problem with the person. It's a problem with the context and conditions of the work. And so principals and other school leaders have a unique opportunity to change those contexts and conditions of the work. And, I'd love to sell you something, that is, some product that would make me rich and that would be guaranteed to work. But it's actually very simple. What principals can do. They can sit down with teachers, and maybe they sit down with small groups of teachers at a time. Maybe they set up groups of teachers to talk about this and leave the room. And the question is, what do you need to do good work here? And what's preventing you from doing good work? And not every idea that the teachers come up with is something that a school leader is going to be able to alter. But they may be surprised that there are some simple, specific things that could make an unimaginable difference to teachers. And, the people who are really suffering in this are students. When we have, turnover, and the turnover is most significant in the schools with students with the most need. And so this is an opportunity to better serve students. And in many ways, the likelihood if we're better serving students, if they're concerned about student outcomes, the likelihood that student outcomes will improve is high. I don't, have we seen this happen yet so we can study it? No. But what would it be like? We know that people who feel like they can do good work, do better work. This doesn't have to be something that is a gimmick. It doesn't have to be something that is yet another program that teachers are saying, I can't believe you're asking me to do one more thing. It's instead just hearing, what does it take to do good work, and what's preventing you from doing good work?
I mean, it's almost the question that a lot of teachers are waiting to be asked almost. I know that there are a lot of days where when, things are going on and it's not a perfect day, all I want at the end of the day is for someone above me to come and ask, "Hey, so what can we be doing to make sure that your job is as easy as possible?" And it's a hard question to ask, and I understand the stress and the fear and the anxiety that comes with a principal's job or an administrator's job. But at the end of the day, I agree with you that the fear that leads to not asking that question is something that we have to overcome as a unit. Because at the end of the day, it's much easier to say, you, the teacher, need to do X, Y, and Z to make sure that your students are getting where they need to go. But all teachers are looking for so often is, hey, let's work together on this. At the end of the day, that's truly what effective school culture looks like, even.
Absolutely. And the teachers who I talked with, they respected principals who listened. They respected principals and school leaders who said, "What do you need?" That school leader was still respected, even if they said, "I can't change this right now, but let's work on this other thing together." It doesn't mean leaving all of the decision making to teachers, but it does mean building some bridges to just making teaching, which is an incredibly difficult job, and many school leaders who have been teachers understand that. How can the focus be on doing the best work possible in order to support students?
Which ultimately circles back to why teachers are in the profession to begin with, is to, come in and be able to really shape and help students grow.
Absolutely. And that's why I think looking at demoralization is so important in terms of teacher attrition. If you ask teachers, why did you go into teaching? Most of them are going to have some sort of moral reason, which was, I wanted to help my community. I wanted to help young people. I believe that education can be liberating in some way. I think that there's beauty in teaching mathematics. All of those are sort of mission-based, mission-driven ideas. That's not to say that teachers should not be respected and paid well in their jobs, right? I'm not saying that, but I do think that a lot of those motivations are in the realm of the moral. And so we need to think about what are the significant and profound effects on teachers when they feel as though they can't access any of that moral the moral components of their jobs anymore.
Because at the end of the day, we've done a lot of research on teacher attrition in terms of, looking at, school district data and looking at how many teachers either leave the job that they're in to go to another school or leave the profession entirely. I can list off 5, 10 different researchers that are out there working on those types of statistical measures that allow us to look at what the landscape is today and what it has been over the last 10, 15 years. But at the end of the day, I think what gets missed so often is exactly what you are hitting on, is this idea that, yes, maybe more money could make someone stay in a situation that isn't perfect. And yes, maybe less responsibility, or go down the list of all the things that might make a teacher's load a little easier. But at the end of the day, people are willing to work in environments where they are doing a moral good when they are doing that good with people who they enjoy working with and they feel like they are working together to solve problems.
I agree. Absolutely.
So to get you out, is there any one, person that you spoke with, any one story that you heard that really stands out to you that kind of drives the point home?
There was a woman who taught fourth 35 years in the same school. And they were told several years back that they needed to all agree on a math curriculum. And so this woman happened to be, her name is Dee Dee. Dee Dee happened to be someone who had won numerous awards for math teaching. And, for reasons we could look at another time, she ceded to her colleagues and wanted to be a team player. And they selected a curriculum and a textbook that she did not think was the best. Her students used to love math, fall in love with math. She was involved in professional associations, recognized for this. And as she used this curriculum, which now was the expectation, she watched students not perform as well in math, students not fall in love with math anymore, and she became demoralized because, what was good about what she did was using her expertise to help students understand and become passionate about math. A new principal came and asked her what she was thinking about and what she needed. And she decided to share with this principal, who did happen to be many years younger than she, that how frustrated she was. And the principal looked at her and said, "What do you need to start the bonfire for those textbooks?" And Dee Dee burst into tears because she felt liberated to be able to serve her students well again. This wasn't because Dee Dee wanted to do something that was ridiculous or that was, something that was controversial in some way. She wanted to use her expertise to teach her students well. And she was given that authority by her new principal. And so someone who is, we could consider in the twilight of their career has become completely re-energized and renewed and is absolutely passionate about her work. And so for me, that both illustrates sort of how terrible demoralization can be for someone and the power that a school leader can have in helping a teacher to become remoralized.
That's incredible, and I think it really drives home exactly what you have talked about throughout this entire interview, for sure. And I'm sure it was heartening for you as well to hear those stories as you do this research to show you that what can be done is very much possible. And at the end of the day, the solution is not something that is complicated, that is overwrought. Instead, it's just a very simple, what do you need? How can I help you?
That simple, but for many people not easy,
right?
Sort of kind of humility and openness to dialogue is, I think, exactly what is missing, but is something that any single school leader can do tomorrow. It's something that's actionable immediately without getting any kind of permission from anyone.
Awesome. Well, Doris, thank you so much for taking time out to talk with me about something that is really, really core to what is going on in so many schools across this country. And I really appreciate it, and I enjoyed the conversation.
Likewise, it was a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you so much to Doris Santoro for coming on the pod. If you want to read more, you can find her book, Demoralized, on Amazon and at other bookstores as well. As always, if you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, make sure you're subscribed to the Late Bell on whatever podcast app you use. Be on the lookout on Twitter at Late Bell Pod and by John Phillips for additional information about the work that Doris Santoro does. And tune in next week to check out our episode about the comical nature of school funding with Zahava Stadler of EdBuild.